In the hushed pre-dawn of July 1st, 1916, the slumbering residents of London might have been jarred awake by a distant, ominous rumble. This sound, a spectral echo of the past, traversed the English Channel, reaching the city's shores like a harbinger of doom. Yet this was no mere morning murmur. It was the prelude to the Battle of the Somme, a tragedy that would etch itself deeply into the annals of British military history. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, it illuminated not just the awakening city, but also the grim reality of a world at war. The Battle of the Somme, a campaign that would become synonymous with the senseless slaughter of the Great War, began with this distant rumble. It was a sound that would soon be drowned out by the cacophony of artillery and the cries of men. But in those early hours, it was a solitary, haunting reminder of the horrors to come. This was a battle that would test the resolve of nations, the bravery of soldiers, and the very limits of human endurance. Today, we delve into the heart of this campaign, uncovering the details buried by time, and exploring how they reflect the absurdity and tragedy of human warfare. We will journey through the strategic disposition, the desperate charges, and the partial victories, all while grappling with the enduring questions of why and how such a conflict could unfold. Join us as we retrace the steps of history, seeking to understand the echoes of the past that still resonate in our present. By the end of 1915, the First World War had devolved into a bloody stalemate, a gruesome tableau of trenches and barbed wire that stretched across Europe. The Allied powers, France, Britain, Russia, Italy, and Serbia, found themselves entangled in a grim dance of attrition. Each step forward or back measured in the lives of countless soldiers desperate for a solution to break the deadlock. They sought a strategy that could shift the balance of power. The unexpected maneuverability of German forces had become a critical problem for the Allies. The Germans' ability to rapidly transfer troops between the different fronts of the war had allowed them to maintain a tenacious grip on the battlefield. In response, the leaders of the Allied nations decided that in 1916, they would launch major offensives simultaneously, stretching the German army to its limits and, they hoped, breaking the might of the Kaiser for good. As the new year dawned, the stage was set for a series of battles that would define the course of the war. The Italians struck in the south, the Russians marched east, and the British and French prepared to launch their attack on the Somme. The world was a tinderbox, and the spark that would ignite the conflagration was but a moment away. As 1916 unfolded, the Allied powers found themselves embroiled in a complex game of chess, each move meticulously calculated to outmaneuver their German opponents. The strategy was bold and ambitious: simultaneous major offensives across multiple fronts, designed to stretch the German army thin and exploit any vulnerabilities. The Italians, in the south, aimed to strike at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, while the Russians, in the east, sought to capitalize on their numerical advantage. Meanwhile, the British and French focused their efforts on the Western Front, with the Somme serving as the focal point of their combined assault. The choice of the Somme was not arbitrary. It was a place where British and French forces met, a river in northern France that, while devoid of immediate strategic significance, was chosen for its potential to disrupt German defenses. The plan was to launch a coordinated attack, with 39 battle-hardened French divisions advancing in the south and still inexperienced British and Commonwealth forces providing support in the north. Theoretically sound, the plan assumed that the Germans would be too preoccupied to launch an offensive of their own. However, the Allies miscalculated. In February 1916, the Germans unleashed a massive assault on the French fortress city of Verdun, drawing more and more French troops into a whirlpool of death. The number of French divisions allotted to the upcoming Somme offensive dropped from 39 down to 12, transforming the major offensive into a primarily British affair. Despite this change of plans, British commander Sir Douglas Haig remained optimistic. The Battle of Verdun had placed an enormous strain on the German army, and Haig believed that the British now possessed an adequate supply of artillery and ammunition to carry out a truly massive assault. Haig's confidence was bolstered by the belief that the British forces could seize the first two lines of German defenses simultaneously, maximizing their chance for a decisive breakthrough. Having learned the importance of artillery in previous campaigns, Haig sought to obliterate German positions at the Somme. The stage was set for a battle that would test the mettle of soldiers and the resolve of nations. A battle that would become synonymous with the senseless slaughter of the Great War. The year 1916 was fraught with tension and anticipation as the Allied powers prepared for their grand strategy. Yet, amidst the meticulous planning and hopeful optimism, a dark shadow loomed over the Western Front. Verdun, the fortress city, once a symbol of French resilience, became the epicenter of a brutal and unrelenting siege by German forces. The Battle of Verdun, which began in February, was a relentless onslaught that drew French troops away from the Somme, altering the balance of power and the course of the impending offensive. The German assault on Verdun was a masterstroke of tactical aggression. By focusing their efforts on a single, strategically vital point, the Germans succeeded in creating a vortex of destruction that consumed both men and materiel. The French, compelled to defend their homeland, poured resources into the battle, leaving the Somme front vulnerable and undermanned. The number of French divisions earmarked for the Somme offensive dwindled from 39 to a mere 12, a significant reduction that shifted the burden onto the shoulders of the British. Despite this unexpected turn of events, British commander Sir Douglas Haig remained undeterred. He saw the strain placed on the German army by the Battle of Verdun as an opportunity. With the Germans stretched thin, Haig believed that the time was ripe for a British offensive. His confidence was further bolstered by the belief that the British army now possessed an adequate supply of artillery and ammunition. Thanks to years of production and preparation, Haig's plan was audacious: to seize the first two lines of German defenses simultaneously, a move that he hoped would create a decisive breakthrough. This strategy, while bold, assumed that the Germans would be too occupied with Verdun to mount a significant counterattack. However, this assumption proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The Germans, though engaged in a brutal struggle at Verdun, were not incapacitated. They maintained a formidable defensive posture at the Somme, ready to meet the British head-on. The Battle of Verdun cast a long shadow over the Somme, a reminder of the unpredictability and brutality of war. It underscored the fragility of strategic plans and the often unforeseen consequences of military actions. As the British prepared to launch their offensive, they did so with the knowledge that the battlefield was a volatile and shifting landscape, where the best laid plans could unravel in the face of relentless enemy resistance. As the summer of 1916 approached, Sir Douglas Haig, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, stood at the precipice of what he believed would be a decisive campaign. Despite the shifting sands of the Verdun front, Haig's optimism remained unshaken. He was convinced that the British army, bolstered by years of production and preparation, was now equipped with an adequate supply of artillery and ammunition to launch a truly massive assault. This belief was the cornerstone of his strategic vision for the Somme. Haig's plan was audacious: to seize the first two lines of German defenses simultaneously, a move that he hoped would create a decisive breakthrough. This strategy, while bold, assumed that the Germans would be too occupied with Verdun to mount a significant counterattack. However, this assumption proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The Germans, though engaged in a brutal struggle at Verdun, were not incapacitated. They maintained a formidable defensive posture at the Somme, ready to meet the British head-on. The Battle of Verdun cast a long shadow over the Somme, a reminder of the unpredictability and brutality of war. It underscored the fragility of strategic plans and the often unforeseen consequences of military actions. As the British prepared to launch their offensive, they did so with the knowledge that the battlefield was a volatile and shifting landscape, where the best laid plans could unravel in the face of relentless enemy resistance. As the days leading up to the offensive ticked away, Over 1,500 British guns prepared to unleash a torrent of firepower. The plan was to saturate the German front line with 1.7 million rounds, a prelude to the main assault that would follow on the morning of July 1st. This bombardment intensified even further, with nearly 1.5 million shells being fired in barely an hour. The British hoped that this barrage would soften the German defenses, making way for the infantry to advance. However, the effectiveness of the bombardment was severely limited by a critical lack of heavy guns. Out of the over 1,500 artillery pieces utilized by the British, only 233 were large enough to cause serious damage to German defenses. Furthermore, up to 30% of the shells fired by the British were duds, failing to explode upon impact. Haig's decision to seize both German trenches simultaneously meant that the bombardment was diluted over a much larger area than it could have been, resulting in less concentrated firepower. Despite these limitations, Haig's optimism persisted. He believed that the sheer volume of firepower would be sufficient to break through the German lines. The British soldiers, laden with up to 60 lbs of gear, prepared to go over the top, confident that the German defenses would be shattered by the artillery barrage. Little did they know that the German trenches, though dazed, were still very much alive, ready to unleash a torrent of machine gun fire upon the advancing troops. The morning of July 1st, 1916, dawned with a cacophony of artillery fire that reverberated across the Somme landscape. The British bombardment, intended to soften the German defenses, had reached its zenith at 7:30 a.m. The British detonated 19 massive mines beneath the German lines, creating colossal craters and a momentary spectacle of chaos. This was the signal for the infantry to advance. As the British soldiers climbed out of their trenches and began their ascent towards the German lines, they were met with a horrifying reality. Despite the intense bombardment, the German defenses remained largely intact. The British artillery, limited in its effectiveness due to a lack of heavy guns and a high percentage of dud shells, had not achieved the desired level of destruction. The German machine guns, which had been shielded from the worst of the barrage, now roared to life, cutting down the advancing British troops in droves. The scene that unfolded was one of utter carnage. British soldiers, weighed down by up to 60 pounds of equipment, struggled uphill through mud and barbed wire. The German machine guns and artillery fire rained down upon them, creating a maelstrom of death and destruction. The British barrage had failed to cut the German barbed wire adequately, leaving the soldiers exposed and vulnerable as they bunched together in desperate attempts to breach the enemy lines. In the first hour alone, the British suffered staggering casualties. By 8:30 a.m., over 10,000 men had been killed, wounded, or captured. The rate of loss was unimaginable, with 500 men falling every minute. Units such as the 1st Newfoundland Regiment were virtually annihilated, losing 91% of their combat strength in a single attack. The 8th King's Royal Rifle Corps, in a futile charge against a well-entrenched German position, suffered similar fates. Despite the overwhelming odds, there were isolated pockets of success south of the village of La Boisselle. British forces managed to break through the German lines and capture their objectives further south. The French were remarkably effective, capturing all of their objectives and taking 4,000 German prisoners without even having to call in their reserves. These successes, however, were overshadowed by the catastrophic losses incurred by the British. The first day of the Battle of the Somme was a grim testament to the horrors of industrial warfare. The British had hoped for a decisive breakthrough, but instead, they faced a brutal reality of trench warfare. The bloodbath of July 1st would be etched into the collective memory of a generation, a stark reminder of the senseless loss of life in the pursuit of victory. As the dust settled on the blood-soaked fields of the Somme on July 1st, 1916, the initial shock of the day's catastrophic losses began to give way to a more nuanced understanding of the battlefield. While the British had suffered immense casualties, there were indeed pockets of success that offered a glimmer of hope amidst the gloom. South of the village of La Boisselle, British forces managed to break through the German lines with remarkable tenacity. The 34th Division, composed of PALS battalions, units made up of friends and neighbors from various towns, fought with a fierce determination. Their coordinated assault, bolstered by the detonation of a massive mine at the Schwab in HHE, allowed them to capture key objectives and establish a precarious foothold in the German defenses. Further south, the French forces demonstrated remarkable effectiveness under the command of General Ferdinand Foch. The French troops advanced with precision and discipline. They captured all of their objectives and took 4,000 German prisoners without even having to call in their reserves. The French success can be attributed to several factors: weaker German defenses in this sector, more effective French artillery support, and innovative tactical maneuvers that exploited gaps in the enemy lines. These partial victories, though overshadowed by the overall British losses, provided valuable lessons and a measure of encouragement to the Allied forces. They demonstrated that despite the overwhelming firepower and entrenched positions of the Germans, breakthroughs were possible with the right combination of strategy, courage, and luck. The successes on the southern flank also highlighted the importance of coordinated and synchronized attacks. The British, in their initial assault, had suffered from a lack of cohesion and a diluted bombardment that failed to sufficiently weaken the German defenses. In contrast, the French and the successful British units had benefited from concentrated firepower and a more focused approach. As the battle continued into the following days, these lessons would be crucial for the Allied commanders. They began to adjust their tactics, aiming for more localized and targeted assaults rather than the broad, sweeping attacks that had characterized the first day. The hope was that by concentrating their efforts and learning from the successes of July 1st, they could gradually wear down the German defenses and inch closer to a breakthrough. The dawn on the battlefield of the Somme, though tinged with the blood of countless fallen, also brought with it the promise of new strategies and the resilience of the human spirit. The partial victories of July 1st, while a small consolation in the face of such devastation, served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are moments of light and triumph to be found. The Battle of the Somme did not end with the catastrophic first day as the weeks turned into months. The fighting continued with a relentless intensity that would come to define the protracted nature of the conflict. The period from July to November 1916 saw a series of battles that, while less publicized, were no less brutal or significant. These were the forgotten battles of the Somme, a phase of the campaign that saw both sides locked in a grim struggle for incremental gains. Throughout this period, the British and French forces launched a series of offensives aimed at breaking through the German defenses. Each attack was preceded by a heavy artillery bombardment, intended to soften up the enemy positions. However, the effectiveness of these barrages was often limited by the same issues that had plagued the initial assault: a lack of heavy guns, a high percentage of dud shells, and the Germans' ability to reinforce their positions quickly. The British, under the command of Sir Douglas Haig, continued to push forward. Despite the mounting casualties, they launched attacks on key points such as High Wood, Delville Wood, and Weill-le-Mont, each one a testament to the dogged determination of the Allied forces. These battles were characterized by their brutal attrition, with both sides suffering heavy losses for minimal gains. The terrain, now churned into a muddy wasteland by the constant shelling, made movement and supply difficult, adding to the misery of the soldiers. One particularly brutal episode was the struggle for the village of Pozires. The Australian forces, in a series of attacks from July to August, suffered nearly as many casualties in just 6 weeks as they had in 8 months at Gallipoli. The village changed hands multiple times, each capture and recapture marked by fierce fighting and heavy losses. Despite the relentless pressure, the German defenses held firm. The Germans, under the command of General Fritz von Below, were able to reinforce their positions and launch counterattacks that often nullified the gains made by the Allies. The German tactic of elastic defense, a flexible approach that allowed them to withdraw to prepared positions and then counterattack proved effective in blunting the Allied advances. The forgotten battles of the Somme were a microcosm of the broader war. A grinding, attritional conflict where the human cost was immense, and the strategic gains were often meager. The soldiers on both sides fought with bravery and resilience, but the war of positions and attrition took a heavy toll on their morale and lives. As the autumn rains set in and the battlefield became a quagmire, the prospects for a decisive breakthrough grew increasingly dim. Both sides were exhausted, and the will to continue the fight was waning. The battle, which had begun with such hope and optimism, had devolved into a grim test of endurance, where the only certainty was the ever-increasing tally of casualties. The forgotten battles of the Somme, though overshadowed by the initial shock and scale of the first day's slaughter, were a crucial part of the broader narrative of the Great War. They highlighted the futility of trench warfare and the senseless waste of life, serving as a poignant reminder of the human cost of conflict. As the Battle of the Somme dragged on into its third month, both sides were desperate for a breakthrough. The stalemate on the Western Front had become a grueling test of endurance, with each offensive resulting in heavy casualties and minimal gains. It was in this context that the British introduced a revolutionary new weapon, the tank. The development of the tank had begun in 1915, driven by the need to overcome the static nature of trench warfare. The idea was to create a vehicle that could navigate the treacherous terrain of no man's land, cross enemy trenches, and support infantry advances. The tank, with its armored hull and tracks, promised to be the key to breaking the deadlock. On September 15, 1916, the world witnessed the first use of tanks in combat. The British attack, codenamed the Battle of Flores-Courcelles TDE, saw the deployment of 49 tanks, though only 30 managed to reach the starting line due to mechanical failures. The tanks, slow and cumbersome, lumbered forward at a top speed of just 4 miles per hour, their engines roaring and belching smoke. The initial reaction from the German troops was one of shock and disbelief. The sight of these metal behemoths, impervious to small arms fire, was unlike anything they had encountered before. The tanks, however, were far from invincible. Mechanical breakdowns were common, and their slow speed made them easy targets for artillery and machine guns. Despite these limitations, the tanks proved their worth in certain areas. In the center of the British offensive, 12 tanks managed to support a successful infantry advance, pushing the British lines forward by around 3,000 yards. The tanks' ability to cross trenches and provide covering fire allowed the infantry to advance with greater security and effectiveness. The first use of tanks at the Somme was a mixed success. While they did not single-handedly break the German defenses, they demonstrated the potential of this new technology. The tanks provided a psychological boost to the British troops, who saw them as a symbol of hope and innovation for the Germans. The tanks were a stark reminder of the ever-evolving nature of warfare and the need to adapt. Sir Douglas Haig, recognizing the potential of tanks, immediately placed an order for 1,000 more vehicles. The British continued to refine and improve the design, addressing issues of reliability and maneuverability. The tank's debut at the Somme marked the beginning of a new era in military technology, one that would shape the future of warfare. The Battle of the Somme, with its introduction of tanks, highlighted the intersection of technology and strategy. The tanks, though still in their infancy, offered a glimpse of the possibilities that lay ahead. They represented a shift from the static, attritional warfare of the trenches to a more dynamic and mobile form of combat. The hope that the tanks brought to the battlefield was a testament to the enduring human spirit's quest for innovation and progress, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As the Battle of the Somme drew to a close in November 1916, the landscape was littered with the scars of a conflict that had tested the limits of human endurance. The campaign, which had begun with such hope and optimism, ended in a sobering reality of staggering casualties and limited territorial gains. The British suffered approximately 420,000 casualties, the French around 205,000. and the Germans an estimated 465,000 to 600,000. In return for these hundreds of thousands of lives, the Allies had advanced just 7 miles. The battle, often remembered as one of the defining cataclysms of the Great War, forced both sides to reflect on the senseless slaughter and the futility of trench warfare. It highlighted the need for new strategies and technologies. To break the deadlock, the introduction of tanks, though still in their infancy, offered a glimmer of hope for the future of combat. In the aftermath, the Battle of the Somme became a symbol of the horrors of war. A stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. It also sparked a re-evaluation of military tactics and the role of technology in warfare. The lessons learned from the Somme would influence the strategies of both the Allies and the Central Powers in the battles to come, shaping the course of the war and the future of military engagements. The Battle of the Somme, with its profound human cost and indelible marks on the landscape, stands as a poignant testament to the complexities and tragedies of war. As the echoes of artillery and the cries of soldiers fade into the annals of history, the lessons from this pivotal conflict remain resonant. The Somme was not just a battle. It was a turning point that shaped the course of the Great War and left an enduring legacy on military strategy and the collective consciousness of a generation. The introduction of tanks, though fraught with challenges, symbolized the dawn of a new era in warfare, one where technology and innovation would play a critical role in determining the outcome of conflicts. The Somme also underscored the importance of adaptability and the need for continuous evolution in military tactics to counter the ever-changing dynamics of war. In the broader context of history, the Somme serves as a stark reminder of the senseless loss of life and the futility of certain forms of warfare. It challenges us to reflect on the moral and ethical dimensions of conflict and to seek ways to resolve disputes without resorting to violence. The echoes of the Somme continue to reverberate, urging us to learn from the past and to strive for a future where the horrors of war are relegated to history. As we look back on the Somme, we are reminded of the resilience and courage of those who fought, the sacrifices they made, and the enduring impact of their struggle. The battle, with its profound lessons, invites us to honor their memory by committing to peace and understanding, ensuring that the echoes of history guide us towards a more compassionate and just world.